how do we level up our teams and ourselves to take advantage of some of this? Where, not just for writing a poem, right? But for actually, creating positive impact on our workday and creating some efficiency.
Welcome to another episode of Sell Me This Podcast. Today, we have an exciting conversation with Nish Sampath from Switch Advisory Group, where we dive into everything fractional. From why it's important, how it got started, and what makes a good fractional consultant, this conversation's for you. Welcome to another episode of Sell Me This Podcast. Today, we are incredibly excited to have with us Nish Sampath, the CEO of Switch Advisory. We're going to dive right into things. Nish, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Thanks for having me, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the CEO of Switch Advisory. It's a fractional chief operating officer agency. Started it about 3 years ago. I decided I had enough of the corporate world and wanted to make a little bit of a switch, no pun intended, Keith. And here I am today, kind of 3 years later, gone down this journey and frankly, still figuring it out as we go.
Well, I feel like whenever you and I get together for coffee, I always enjoy our chats because I'd say you're probably about a year in front of us in terms of your career or kind of business maturity. And I think we go through a lot of the same challenges. It seems like we're kind of figuring things out together at some point.
Absolutely.
And so super, super excited to have you on the show.
Thank
Before
you.
we dive into the very serious content, as you know, we have a tradition on the show where the guests get to pick their artwork. And so I know you did a lot of prep for this, and and so I'd love to hear your story around the piece here that you'd selected.
Yeah, so this is Starry Night by Van Gogh, and we had a family trip maybe 3 years ago now out to Saint Remy in France, where Van Gogh was actually the mental asylum where he stayed is in Saint Remy, and I would say about 45 minutes outside of Saint Remy, and I'll butcher the name again, but it's a town called Les Baux-de-Provence. And it is a really tiny little cool town, but they have these giant limestone quarries. And within the quarry, there's this art exhibit. It's called Les Carrières de Lumière. Again, butchered the name. But it is they project all this impressionist painting on all of the surfaces of this giant quarry. So the floors, the ceilings, the walls, and they make it move and make it interactive, and it flows to classical music. And it's just an absolutely incredible experience. So if you're ever in France, you got to go see it. And apparently there's other similar exhibits across Europe as well. So got to check those out as well.
Very cool. I think that I'm going to have to add it to the bucket list of things to see.
Yeah.
Each time I talk to you, it sounds like you've gone somewhere exciting. Are you a big traveler?
I was before kids. I think, my guy he's turning 9 this year. So we'll probably be back on the travel kick again. He's at that age.
Right, where they're old enough to kind of remember now. And
exactly.
And anywhere on the kind of first list that you want to go?
Portugal.
Yeah. I've heard that from a lot of people. I feel like Portugal's a hot spot right now.
Yeah, it's supposed to be incredible.
Yeah. And so, Switch Advisory. So I want to dive, before we talk about Switch too much, into your experience that kind of led you here. And so if you were to kind of summarize your career and the things and steps that you took to get to a spot where you're launching Switch, what does that journey look like for you?
Yeah, great question. My experience is primarily in healthcare and product. So, I spent a lot of time in the healthcare space trying to save the world, but from, not the doctor side, but from the technology side. And I learned to operate in giant systems with a lot of constraints. And at some point, though, kind of came to the conclusion that your ability to make an impact in some of these giant corporations is limited. And, as I came into my midlife crisis, I decided, hey, I need to go have some more fun. I need to make a bigger impact with my career. Where do I go? And I decided to join a startup in town. And that was pretty incredible experience, right? You move from this giant organization where, you're constrained from a speed perspective. There's zero risk tolerance in organizations like that. And you move to an environment where You have massive financial constraints. There's no bureaucracy, but everything's a massive risk at the same time. And you have competitors knocking at your door every day. You got to figure out, how do you move faster and quicker and more aggressively? And how do you make more intelligent decisions every day? And just throw a little bit of caution to the wind, but in a smart way, and go fast, right? And so I really loved that journey, and I joined that organization as a COO. There were 3 founders, and just helping to align the troops and get everybody fighting in the same direction. I found my calling, I think, and decided that would be really cool to do that across different organizations at the same time. And it was kind of when Fractional started to actually be a thing all of a sudden.
Well, because I feel like and pioneer is probably maybe a generous word, but I think you were on the front end of that fractional movement where you're starting to see people that are wanting to show up for work differently. You're starting to see organizations that maybe don't have the bandwidth to consume those kind of caliber of people in the same way. How did you kind of make that shift to say, like, if I can work for 3 or 4 organizations at the same time, do this really meaningful work, I can make something of it. Was it a hard thing to wrap your head around, or did it just kind of happen organically?
For me, it was fairly organic. After, working at the startup, I found that there is an ability to make a pretty significant impact within an organization, even if you're time constrained, right? Even if you're splitting your time across different organizations, if you have a method and you actually know what you're doing and you're able to focus on, the most important or the most important or the most important activities, you can make a pretty significant dent in a reasonable period of time, where traditionally we go into companies and frankly, we fill our days with some bogus work just because that's what happens, right? And so it did happen fairly organically. And I followed a little bit of, the leadership from other fractionals in the space. Obviously, CFO has been a fractional thing for some time. They probably changed, the term from more of a consultative CFO to a fractional CFO. And there were some leaders in Calgary who were doing it around the marketing fractional executives. But I thought I was very clever. I thought I was, first to come out with this concept, and until I started looking around and I figured, oh, there's a lot of people actually doing this, and it is a model that makes sense.
So I'm going to hit you with it. Hopefully this isn't a hardball, but there's so much talk around fractional, around contractors, consulting. Is it something that's the same thing that has different vernacular around it, or is there in your mind a different kind of set of responsibilities or expectation as you're, talking about those kind of 3 different verbiages?
Yeah, traditionally I see, consultant as more of an advisor. You're most often on the outside providing direction and saying, here's the things you should do, more often than not. Fractional is kind of taking the leap where you're not just providing the advice, but you're adding bandwidth within the organization. So you become an active member of that company. You're part of their leadership team. You are, you're hiring, you're negotiating, you're restructuring the organization from the inside out. And so it does come with a little bit of a different responsibility. I would like to think we take more ownership than traditionally the consulting model has been. But having said that, I think a lot of the consultants are moving in that direction anyways.
Right. And I think especially maybe, technology is some of what's driving this, but it's the less of the, person sitting on the sidelines kind of pointing at all the things you need to fix and saying, good luck, here's your playbook.
Yeah.
And more of how do you roll up your sleeves? How do you get in there and actively drive the change versus just being a cheerleader off to the side?
That's exactly it. I mean, the traditional consulting model was, we're going to give you a lot of advice and you're going to take it from us because frankly, you can blame it on us. We're kind of the insurance policy, right? But for organizations, within the size that we try to work with, which are companies between 2 and 50 million, most often than not, they don't have the luxury of, paying for high-priced advice. They need somebody to go and do the work with them. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough resources. They don't have enough time, frankly. They're often founder CEO-led organizations where that individual is already kind of bleeding themselves dry, and they need extra set of hands to get in there and do the work.
That makes complete sense to me. And so as you're talking about that being done on an operations standpoint, I can see that being a challenging delineation sometimes because operations can often, as you probably know, become a catch-all
Yes.
for
Yeah.
the problems they're not quite sure how to solve. It's operations, and even we see like IT and digital problems pop into operations. Finance often jumps in there. How are you shaping those engagements so it doesn't just become this enormous body of work and rather can be really focused on the things that you're talking about?
Yeah. That's still an ongoing learning adventure, if we're honest, right?
Yeah.
I think there's, we come into the organization and we look across the value chain and say, okay, what are those significant opportunities for improvement across people, strategy, execution, and cash? And then we say, within those opportunities, what's actually going to move the needle, right? If we're in a given company for, either 2 to 3 days per week, that's not a lot of time. So we're fairly constrained. We need to focus again on the most important of the most important of the most important activities. And for the large part, those activities have to impact revenue, COGS, or operating cost. And unless there's like some visible and clear alignment with an impact to one of those three indicators, we probably shouldn't do it, right? We simply don't have enough time. I think the other part is, for us is recognizing that we shouldn't do everything. And there's probably other people better served in our ecosystem to take on those responsibilities. So if it's, a deep financial challenge where we need to get our forward projections up to speed for capital raise, should we do it? No, right? Should we be creating our marketing strategy and executing that, the new ad campaign? No, we should not be doing that. Should we be looking at your HR? I mean, we can look at your people challenges, but when it comes to, building out the discrete HR processes within the organization and managing some of that, should we do it? No. We have to rely on our ecosystem of partners to make sure we're bringing in the right human with the right skill set and better serving our clients.
So would it be too simplistic to say that a lot of the heavy lift is actually helping with that prioritization and kind of making sure that people are focused on the right things?
I think that's the best way to say it. I wish I said it that way. Yeah.
Well, but I also love what you said too, and I think that there's some really funny beliefs around constraints. And I'm curious on your perspective, but from my view, I think constraints are a really powerful thing because I've always lived by the kind of an adage that work fills all available time.
Yes.
And I think that there's a tendency, especially when you think about like traditional employment models, to say, okay, I show up for my 40, 60, 80 hours a week, and I need to make sure I'm doing stuff, and I'm busy, and I just want to make sure that I'm visibly busy versus visibly productive.
Yeah.
And so I think that challenge of compressing things into a shorter time period gets you out of the weird all hands meeting, gets you out of the things that aren't actually driving those levers forward. Like, do the constraints become really powerful in terms of your ability to actually affect change?
I think constraints in general are very powerful, right? I think creativity thrives with constraints, right? If you just have no constraining forces on either side, you just make stuff up randomly as you go. And you see that both in the creative sense and from an execution sense. And so absolutely, it's very imperative that we kind of hold ourselves accountable to those constraints. And frankly, from a client's perspective, they really don't care about how much time you put into it. They're focused on outcomes. Time is our constraint. Outcomes the only thing they actually are interested in.
And so is that a universal? Because like I think that, and even some leaders that I've talked to, and because we struggle with this, some of the same narrative when we're talking to customers, where there's a comfort in someone that's full time and more of a traditional employment
Certainly.
Relationship, where it's like I know they're going to be there when I ask them for something.
Yeah.
And so do you think that just becomes more of a catch-all for the leaders that aren't quite sure what to do as well? Or like how do you navigate organizations that make that transition from having someone available to having someone that's delivering?
Yeah, I mean that's something we still face, right? I think a lot of it is organizations that have had some experience with fractional already, obviously they're more amenable to it. And so if they've had a fractional CFO, they're more willing to bring in a fractional COO, for example. If, on the other hand, they've never had any experience with it, they are likely to question how much impact you can have within that period of time. So, our challenge is to create referenceable, impact statements from other clients that we can say, hey, listen, here's what we've done. Actually go talk to our client, and our clients will tell you that was the best decision we've ever made. We really didn't need them full time. We just needed someone with the right level of experience to come in to help guide that conversation during that short period of time.
That makes sense. And so is there a DNA of a type of organization or stage of organization that's best suited to fractional? Like if you were to say for Switch, I wave my magic wand and the ideal customer kind of pops in front of us.
Yeah.
Without being too limiting, like what is the DNA that makes someone a good consumer of fractional services?
It's a great question. I think couple things, at least from Switch's perspective, and I think it differs based on the fractional models out there. One is, there's a revenue level for us because it determines, if you're generally between 2 and 50 million, but that's generally where you have product market fit, right? If you're pre-product market fit, we're not the right solution for you. There's other resources that are probably better suited for your organization at that point in time. If you're a hyperscaler and you're growing too quickly, you probably need full-time support. And likewise, if you're over 50 to 75 million, you often need full-time support, right? You're growing very quickly. Your headcount is too large from a COO perspective. You probably need full-time. But within that space, that 2 to 50, we find we can make a pretty significant impact. So organizations within that, revenue size, they're generally, founder CEO led still. Occasionally we're brought in through the board, but most often than not, founder CEO. And they are, they've hit an inflection point. They're the organizations that they've grown and they've outgrown the founder CEO's ability to operate the company. And they recognize that. And it generally kind of shows up in a revenue plateau. And oftentimes, some founder frustration where they're even thinking about exiting. And they're saying, listen, we've built a good company. This is as far as we can potentially take it on our own. Either we get support to remove that founder dependency so we can actually sell the company, which is a huge part of what we do, or we again remove founder dependency to help us continue to scale up.
Right. So from what I'm hearing, like a lot of the work where you have some of those CEO or founders that are right in the thick of things, regardless of whether or not they want to scale or exit, they need to get their house in order.
Yeah. I mean, they founded a company and then they found themselves in a job, right? I think that's the biggest challenge. They find themselves back in a job and they're like, oh, this is not what I signed up for. I thought I was an entrepreneur, founded a company, was hoping to kind of, get that freedom, that entrepreneurial, experience should eventually help me pursue, but they're back and just employed by their own company.
Yeah. Well, and like it's a very different job. Like that phase from 0 to 2, the phase from 2 to 50, the phase from 50 plus. Like they're functionally different jobs, and there's not a lot of people that actually fit the DNA with that they are great at each of them or even love doing each of those things too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of folks that love to get in the weeds and actually do the work, and that makes sense for fractional. There's some that are more, board level advisors that like to provide strategy, and there's a completely different, space for that type of consultant to come in.
So I guess that brings up a good question: is how do you pick the right fit for your organization? Like, and I know that's part of the work that you do, and especially as you've kind of grown and scale and playing the matchmaker side of things.
Yeah.
But how, if I'm a business leader trying to pick the right fractional leader to sit shotgun with me as we're making some of these really fundamental evolutions to our business, how do I know that I'm picking the right one, and what should I be looking for to make sure that I find that right person to ride shotgun with me?
That's a great question. I think first is, and you probably see this as well. It's you got to have that values and cultural alignment, right? You got to be able to see that person as your right hand, and be able to take their advice You have to be able to be willing to actually spend some time with that individual because you're going to spend a lot of time with that person. So if you can't get along, if you don't have that alignment from a values perspective, it's never going to work, right? We want to make sure when we're doing that matchmaking that the CEO and the COO really jive well together. The CEO can see the COO as they're both the little devil and the little angel on their shoulder, depending on what needs to be done. And they also, as we're not as concerned about, let's call it industry related experience, but we were certainly concerned about, do you have the right problem solution experience? Like, have you solved the types of problems that this company is going through, whether it's human problems, whether it's, supply chain problems or technology implementation problems, or frankly, just account management, project management problems, right? You have to have solved the right type of problems that the specific organization is actually going through to make sure you're the right fit for that company.
Do you think that most people are aware of what the problem they're trying to solve is, or is that part of kind of your initial conversations with them, is really defining what the roadblock or barrier is?
Oh yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think they're 9 times out of 10, they're just feeling the symptoms of it, right? So they don't actually know causality from what's actually causing the pain. And so we go in again, do that value chain analysis to make sure we actually are diving into it and figuring out what really needs to be fixed. And oftentimes, at least with the founders that we are going to work with, they know that they're the problem most often than not, which is a very good place to start.
I guess if you're being brought in by the board when they don't know they're the problem, that's a more challenging discussion.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. But, oftentimes we will, when we're lucky enough to work with the right clients, right, they know that they're core to the problem and that they need to get out of their own way, frankly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you alluded earlier to, this evolution of Fractional, right? So, you have the CFO, CMO progression, CMOs coming in.
Yeah.
We're starting to see tech come in as well,
Yeah.
right? And I think that it's funny how the chronology has happened, but we're starting to see more and more on the tech advisory with that fractional CTO, CIO, CDO, whatever label we want to put on it.
Yeah.
What do you think is causing that cascade? Is it just familiarity? Is the type of work that maybe the executives are connected to? And I realize there's probably no right answer here, but I'm curious on kind of why it's staggered so differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's familiarity. I think it's the snowball effect, right? It started with a couple of executives on the finance and marketing side, as you suggested, right? Most often the founder CEO is like, yeah, I don't know finance or I don't know marketing. Definitely let's bring in some external expertise for that. And, as things progress, you also see more and more people jumping into the fractional space. And so just the visibility of fractional executives that are capable of providing CTO or CIO or CISO related skills, it's starting to grow. And so it's just creating that broader awareness, it's very powerful, because I think a lot of organizations, as we stated, they don't need the full-time level resource. They just need the right guidance with some additional support in other areas. They could probably hire juniors instead of the senior executive and just bring in the senior executive part-time.
Right. And I guess if you're bringing in the right people, then you can lever up and down the effort as required. So you might not need someone to drive down the highway at 120 miles an hour the entire time. You might need some side roads, and I feel like this is a weird analogy I've chosen, but I can see the ability to be able to kind of pick it up, speed it up, slow it down as being a huge advantage for different stages and milestones of a company too.
Absolutely. And frankly, that's kind of our model, right? We're not meant to be a permanent long-term solution in the organization. We're generally in a company for 6 to 18 months. And our analogy is we're here to build the operating machine, right? Yeah. Once we built that operating system, someone else can drive the car, right? Back to your analogy.
Thank you for saving my analogy.
All right. You don't need to be the engineer to construct it. You just have to drive the car after the fact. And it's, we want to make sure we do train those individuals coming in so that, there's resilience in the organization after we leave. But it takes a different skill set to kind of build that operating infrastructure in the first place.
And so I was having lunch with someone today, and we were having this exact conversation, because we've been stuck in the trap before where, you become a safety blanket almost,
Hmm.
and it's not getting started that's the hard part. It's actually detangling that's the hard part.
Yeah.
And so what advice would you have for people that are setting things up, and maybe they're in the middle of that engagement, but making sure that you do have those mile markers so that it's not an infinity project, that there actually is a legitimate offboarding plan?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you have to go in with the very intention to
Yeah.
make sure you are going to offboard, right? Which makes the requirement there to say,
Yeah.
I have to level up the next layer of leadership,
Yeah.
right? A lot of my time towards the end of the engagement needs to be mentally focused on who's next, who's coming up, how am I coaching and training them, how am I making them more resilient from both an individual and an organizational perspective, so that they're capable of taking this on. Because frankly, if everything falls apart after we leave, well, that's egg on our face,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
And we have to be very intentional about that and make sure we're building that process in the systems, and either hiring into that seat or leveling up individuals within the organization to take over that role after we leave.
I like it. And so that becomes a success criteria as well, of just saying it's as much about those initial wins as the exit win, that the world continues without us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's what we've tried to, accomplish with our clients, and we'll still always maintain relationships. I still have, calls and coaching conversations with, our previous clients on a monthly basis. So just to keep them accountable and make sure they know they have someone to lean on when they need to. But we shouldn't be doing the same work over that extended period of time.
So I'm going to switch gears a tiny bit. And
Yeah.
so you have, probably a little bit of a superpower right now in the fact that you do have some tech background as well, correct?
I do. Yeah.
And so, obviously tech is everywhere right now. How are you seeing that infiltrate the work that you're doing from an operations standpoint?
That's a
Big
tough
question.
one. That's a big question. I think there's almost, when we're thinking about the companies at that $2 to $50 million range, there's probably, two challenges they're facing. So challenge one is they're trying to figure out what to do with the tech they've already bought, right? And that's a big one because they've spent a lot of money and they keep spending a lot of money, but they're not doing anything with it. So how is it actually incorporated within their processes and systems? Is any of the information integrated across different applications? Are we using any of it appropriately? You sign up for all these subscriptions and,
Yeah.
Netflix, Crave, Apple TV as an analogy.
Yeah.
And then you go down and you're like, oh, geez, that's a lot of money every month that we're burning on this stuff. What are we doing with it? And so a lot of it is consolidation. It's kind of creating alignment between processes and technology to make sure it is fit for purpose, and actually makes sense. And exactly what we would bring somebody like you in for is like, bigger company, help us make sense out of this tech strategy. Like there's a lot going on. Where do we go down this in the future? Right. So that's probably, let's say 50%. The other 50% is AI, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we have to keep up with the Joneses. We need to figure out how to create more efficiency with less. And unfortunately today that means with less human, manpower. And so how do we level up our teams and ourselves to take advantage of some of this, where, not just for writing a poem, right? But for actually, creating positive impact on our workday and creating some efficiency. And so it is understanding what's available, because there's an AI tool for everything today. So even helping to navigate that landscape and figuring out what is the most important tool to get to use. How do we introduce some early stage tests to see if they're viable within the organization, and just start exploring AI a little bit.
And I'm really glad you said that. And the dangerous part sometimes, at least in my opinion, and some of the work that we see, is on that AI front where you're starting to lead with the tool.
Yeah.
But it's on the tip of everyone's tongue, and everyone, whether it's their desire, whether it's their boards, whether it's different members of the leadership team, it's something that has to be part of their conversation. And I feel like there's such a connection between operations and technology simply because like the technology, you can't just buy AI tool number 3, plug it in and say, okay, now the world's a better place.
Yeah.
You really need to have your house in order for that technology to work properly. Like we've always said that it's a great amplifier, right? And so if you have really good process, if you have a really strong operational backbone, it can amplify the things that are working really well.
Yeah.
Inversely, if you have shitty processes, if you have things that are broken, if you have things that have a whole bunch of human intervention, AI and technology are actually going to make that way worse if you don't sort those things out first.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of a red flag when I hear, founders saying, hey, we need you to help come in and turn this into an AI first company.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, you should be people first.
Yeah.
And then we build some strong processes around those people. And then we make them more effective and efficient using AI. I think that's the right path. But just thinking that, AI is going to solve all our problems, at least today, certainly not. And so it's figuring out, as you mentioned, do we have the right people? Are those people completely aligned? Do we have a clarity in our strategy? Do we have actual processes that are, mapped, managed, monitored? Do we have the underlying technology, whether it's AI or something else, to support that technology? And is our cash aligned with the organizational strategy?
Yeah.
Right. And so we don't lead with tech ever. We lead with kind of the overarching principles of how are your processes being executed today? Where are those opportunities to inject the technology? And does it make sense from a human perspective? How do you go through that change management and that training that's required?
You're music to my ears right here. And I feel like sometimes it's easy to chase that shiny object, and it just kind of can lead you down some pretty significant rabbit holes. You've been a big advocate, I'd say, on the fractional ecosystem side of things. And so I won't share the clever name that you come up with, but and you can. I don't want you're allowed to say it. You can swear on here if you want. But you've done a really incredible job of bringing together a community of fractional people.
Thank you.
In the Calgary ecosystem. And so first of all, like what's inspired you to do that? And second, like I'd love to give you a little bit of airtime to share what you've built in the community that you're fostering here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, it's called the Fockers, which is the Fractional Officers of Calgary. And it kind of was rooted in the idea that, fractional is lonely, right? Like you're trying to figure it out. It is very nascent. Nobody really knows how to execute the model, but people are interested in it and they're trying to get into the space. And so how do you offer an opportunity to that growing community of people who want to learn about it to come and learn about it from their peers, right? So that was initially how it started. Is I got into Fractional and said, who else is doing this that I can learn from? And so we just brought some folks together. And now it's evolved a little bit. It is really trying to create that strong community, give that peer group an opportunity to, share their knowledge, share opportunities across the network, and share their network, frankly. And then, we like to make sure we give back to charity as well. So all the proceeds from the tickets, as you know, they go to charity. And that's very important to us as well, because we should be doing something bigger than ourselves. It shouldn't just be about making money, although that's great. But, how do we help society at large and support our peer group? And I think the fractional community is definitely getting larger, right? And it's important because there's a lot of people that are thinking about it, and how do we help them down that path, even if it's maybe not the right path for them, at least help educate them to say, here's what the challenges are, here's where the opportunities lie. If it makes sense for you, come join the fun.
Well, each time I go to one of your events, I feel like the room's a little bit fuller.
Yeah.
Why are there so many people that are interested in that fractional lifestyle right now? Big questions.
No, I mean, I'll tell you why I was. I mean, I just wanted the varied experience, right? Like we get the opportunity to work across industries, across these different geographies, across different, creative founders that are doing really cool, interesting things. And frankly, I'm not that creative myself. So, I like to work with really smart, interesting founders. And so it's given me and others the opportunity to be a part of that journey, that entrepreneurial journey with these other organizations. And it's not as constraining as being in that little corporate box, I think. And that's appealing for a lot of people. You can do it remotely for the most part. And You can have a lot of fun and make a significant impact doing it. Now, again, back to the point where I left my corporate job is because of all the constraints and let's call it the risk adversity of the corporate environment, you simply can't make that much impact in a way that you can as a fractional executive in the SMB space.
Well, and there's so many people that I've talked to that have, ascended to these roles in large organizations, and they arrive at this point and they realize that A, it's not all it's cracked up to be, and B, a lot of the calories that are being burned on, I don't want to say maneuvering, that sounds incorrect, but on just navigating the organization rather than
political maneuvering.
doing
Call
the
it what
work.
it
Well,
is.
yeah, well, you got to work the system, but
Yeah.
But there's so many people that I talk to, and I think you hit the nail on the head, that they love the work.
Yeah.
They just want to do the amazing work, and they don't want to worry about all the other stuff over here.
Yeah.
And the ability to kind of go in, go out, show up in really meaningful ways sounds incredible.
I think that's exactly it, right? People, once they get into it, they really enjoy it. The challenges, of course, is it's how to manage your time, how to actually split your energy between multiple clients. It is not as easy as it may seem. The client has, you're putting in, part-time inputs, but they have full-time outcome expectations, right? They still think you're going to, deliver what a full-time resource would. So it's just being able to manage some of those expectations across clients and do the work and enjoy yourself with the community while you're doing it.
So if you were to give advice to someone that was on the front end of that journey, they're launching their fractional practice, maybe they have their first customer, maybe they don't, but how would you give them a blueprint in terms of the steps to take to get started, to kind of maintain some of that balance, to maintain some sanity? Because it is a departure from the safety blanket of kind of big corporate before.
Yeah. I think to be successful, you have to create your methodology for how you execute. Like, how do you go into a client, understand the client landscape, execute, and make a really significant impact in a really short period of time, right? You need your blueprint for that. And it probably starts out with, similar to myself, just doing at one client, right? Part-time within a startup, for example, understanding how you're going to execute and then scaling that model across multiple clients. So first and foremost, don't take too many clients at once. I did that, made that mistake. It was very painful. And now I coach my COOs to not make a similar mistake. Context switching is very difficult. And when you start to try to context switch across too many different clients, it can become very hairy and frankly more stressful than just having a job. So you have to get used to that. And the other part is you have to get used to some level of pipeline ambiguity, right? With a job, you just have a job. And it's less safe than it used to be, as we all know, right? So it's not any safer, frankly, but it appears that way on the surface, right? If Fractional has to sell, you have to create sales pipeline for yourself and make sure that as you roll off one client, you can start to roll into another client. That's challenging.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up a really interesting point around the certainty of you've seen the layoffs, like they're not just Calgary, it's across the globe that traditional working is being disrupted.
Yeah.
And I've even coached some of our consultants that the only difference is when the contract ends. And you have exact line of sight into when that is, and maybe it'll extend or maybe it won't, but at least you just have a date.
Yeah.
And sometimes the devil is better than when you don't. And I think that there's this illusion of security sometimes in full-time gigs.
The illusion of security is the best way to put it, right? I think, and before, when I had the illusion of security when I was in the corporate world, I didn't go and do any networking. I didn't go meet people and create that broad relationship base. And I would say, that's more valuable than, even your experience today. So go out there, make some friends, understand what the business landscape looks like. Continue to strengthen your ecosystem of partners and your ecosystem of relationships so that when opportunities do arise, they're thinking about you.
Yeah. There's so many people that don't spend that time up front.
Yeah.
And even whether or not you're thinking of making the move or you're not, they kind of reach this point where all of a sudden they're pushed off a cliff, and they frantically try to rekindle all these relationships from the past 20 years.
Yeah.
And they have to do it really frantically, where
Yeah.
I think if you're a little more, curious, a little more engaged, it definitely pays long-term dividends regardless.
100%. I mean, I think that's advice I should have given myself as well. So, hence the advice I give other people today. Yeah.
I love it. So in terms of Switch, and I feel like our time has flown by here today already. But in terms of Switch, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what makes you special in terms of the work that you're doing, and why are people choosing to work with you? Because I know you're growing in an incredible pace right now, which is awesome. And what's the special sauce that brings people towards your front door?
Well, I think from a client perspective, our COOs are unicorns, right? I like to think of them as unicorns. They have the corporate experience, so they have the seat, right? The executive level seat. They've also had the actual blood, sweat, and tears of working in a startup or a small, medium business where, you have massive financial constraints. You can't just throw money at a problem. You have to roll up your sleeves and do the work. And then they're also executive coaches, so they have a lot of coaching background. And so those three pillars of experience are pretty significant and very, very difficult to find. And on top of that, I think, our methodology is strong, right? So we're not winging it when we go into a client, which is what unfortunately we see a lot of fractionals today doing, is they're going in and trying to wing it. And it's hard to make an impact if you have no game plan going into there.
Yeah, what is it? If you plan to fail to plan, you plan to fail.
There you go.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I think the framework is really important. So are you able to share kind of what your framework is, or is that the secret sauce?
No, I mean, it's not a secret sauce. I mean, we build operational clarity within the organization. So looking across the value chain, understanding those opportunities for improvement. It's really kind of our stage one. We then roll out an operating system. So best in class methodologies, incorporating tools from EOS, scaling up Rockefeller habits in general. We help to implement that. And just make sure there's rhythm, there's accountability, and there's structure within the organization. And then we create a more sustainable organization. So it's all about building resilience within the team, coaching those leaders up, and making sure that we're leaving that organization stronger than we did before.
I feel like you've said that one before.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you today. This has been a amazing conversation.
Thanks,
I feel
Keith.
like I have 1,001 more questions for you, but I want to kind of stick to the time we have allotted. But
Amazing.
if you were to, if someone wanted to find you, if someone to track you down, hopefully in a good way, hopefully you haven't made any mortal enemies on the podcast today. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Best way is just hit up our website, switchadvisory.com, or hit me up directly, info@switchadvisory.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been a blast, and look forward to keeping chatting.
Thanks so much, Keith. Appreciate it.
If you've made it this far, like and subscribe on YouTube, or follow and leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform so you don't miss any future episodes.